James Gunn's plans for the DCU. Near the start of 2023, James Gunn revealed the first stage of his 10-year plan to make a new DC universe. But since then, there have been a few bumps along the road. He and Peter Safran may be a little closer to their new cinematic universe, but DC fans have gotten frustrated and confused along the way. It turns out rebooting an entire multiverse isn't as simple as it seems. While James Gunn has been making announcements for the DCU, he's been working overtime on Twitter, debunking rumors and correcting false headlines. Fans have been getting whiplash from all the info leaks, strange theories, and made-up news reports, but we're here to clear a path through this swamp of information. So don't worry, Swamp Thing isn't really a monster, and Lex Luthor isn't really a porn star. The Flash has canonically reset the DCU, so from a narrative standpoint, we are currently in James Gunn's new cinematic universe. But if we're talking about who's making the movies, Blue Beetle and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom were still technically created by the old Warner Bros. Discovery team, before DC became DC Studios. So while these superheroes might be fighting on a new Earth, we're still seeing movies from the old DC. The actual first chapter of the new DCU will be called Gods and Monsters, but this period of transition has become a bit of a gray area. Although Gunn and Safran's introduction to DC was meant to be a hard reboot, it gets softer every day. It's uncertain if we'll see any of the story from Blue Beetle and Aquaman in future DC narratives, but Gunn has said that Jolo Mariduena will keep playing Blue Beetle going forward. Even though we don't know how big his role will be, it seems Gunn may be picking and choosing which parts of the story he will keep going forward. For example, he made an announcement that the animated series My Adventures with Superman will not be a part of the new DC continuity. James Gunn and Peter Safran's reboot will begin in earnest with an animated series called Creature Commandos. It will be the first new creation from DC Studios and the first proper entry into the story Gunn plans to tell over the next 10 years. Creature Commandos is about a special group of superhumans that was created to fight the Nazis during World War II, so to start the world off right, it looks like we're going back in time. An important aspect of this series, which Gunn pointed out back in his January announcement, was that the actors who play the superheroes in the DCU will follow their characters into and out of animation, meaning that although Creature Commandos is an animated series, we might see a live-action version of these characters one day. Viola Davis is already cast in Creature Commandos as Amanda Waller, giving us a good example of this transition. She played the character in the previous incarnation of the DCU and will continue to do so in the HBO series Waller, which is next on the slate. Although the plot is under wraps for now, we know it will be based on the comic of the same name and include characters from Gunn's very successful Peacemaker series. Next up on the list is the first film of the new DC Studios and what James Gunn calls the true beginning of the DCU, Superman Legacy. Naturally, this is the keystone of the DC universe and people are following the news on it with a microscope. Fans made quite the uproar when Henry Cavill was removed from his post as Superman, but as Gunn remakes the DCU, he's chosen to keep very few people from the old universe. After a lengthy casting process, David Corenswet has been chosen to don the red cape and become the centerpiece of this new universe. Gunn recently clarified that Superman Legacy is not a young Superman story, but rather one focusing on Clark Kent in his 20s while living in Metropolis. There was a recent leak about the movie from known Hollywood scooper Daniel RPK. He said that the movie's plot would contain some kind of conflict in the fictional Middle Eastern country of Bialya. Whether or not this is true ought to be taken with a grain of salt. Daniel RPK has been right in the past, but only about 50% of the time. One thing we do know is that the movie won't tell Superman's origin story, and in fact will introduce several big characters that, in this version of the world, will have already existed in the DC universe. Rachel Brosnahan of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel will play Lois Lane, Eddie Gathegi from The Harder the Fall will be Mr. Terrific, Isabella Merced, who's known for playing Dora the Explorer, will get a bit of role change as she plays Hawkgirl, and Anthony Carrigan from Barry will play Metamorpho. There had been a rumor circulating that Lex Luthor was going to appear in the movie as well, and that James Gunn had cast an ex-porn star named Johnny Sins to play him. It went so far as to be announced on several small entertainment news sites. Naturally, as soon as Gunn heard of this, he shut down the rumor. And while there are many whispers of who is on the shortlist to play the infamous DC villain, no one has been announced as of yet. Fans were excited to learn, though, that Nathan Fillion had been cast as the new Green Lantern. He will appear in Superman Legacy as Guy Gardner, And the HBO series that follows the movie, called Lanterns, will be about the Green Lantern Corps, but will focus on two different characters, Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart. That series, says Gunn, will be more like a gritty detective story rather than an intergalactic alien-fighting romp. After this, there will be a movie called The Authority, based on a Wildstorm Comics universe that will be folded into the DCU. After announcing this movie, we learn that the heroes from an alternate universe will actually make up a large part of Gunn's long-term narrative. Next is a Wonder Woman HBO series called Paradise Lost. Gunn described it as being like Game of Thrones, but with the Amazons of DC Comics. Originally, there was meant to be a third Wonder Woman movie starring Gal Gadot. James Gunn and Peter Safran assured Gadot early on that they would be keeping her as the legendary Amazon princess, but some fans are worried now that Wonder Woman 3 has reportedly been cancelled, and Gunn remains eerily silent on whether or not Gadot's position remains secure. The DCU's Batman will begin with a film called The Brave and the Bold. The story revolves around Batman and his biological son, Damian Wayne. While no one has been cast yet, Gunn did say this movie would serve as an introduction for the entire Bat family, meaning we might get to see characters like Nightwing, the Red Hood, and even Batgirl. Robert Pattinson will remain Batman in Matt Reeves' films, but Gunn specified that movies like The Batman and Todd Phillips' Joker will exist outside of the main continuity under the label of DC Elseworlds. It will allow for films like a Black Superman movie from Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Keanu Reeves has been confirmed for a return as Constantine in Elseworlds as well. After The Brave and the Bold will come a live-action miniseries called Booster Gold. Booster Gold is a regular guy from the future that came back in time to pretend to be a superhero using his superior technology. In the comics, Booster Gold often makes appearances with Ted Kord, who we were given mysterious nods to during Blue Beetle. So this might be Gunn's opportunity to bring back Jolo Mariduena or introduce another version of the Blue Beetle character. Next is the film Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. The character of Supergirl has a much closer attachment to her home planet of Krypton than Superman, and is a thoroughly more cynical character. While Sasha Calle played her in The Flash, it's unsure whether she will reprise her role as Supergirl in the future. Finally, on the DCU's current release calendar is Swamp Thing. James Gunn said that this would be a horror story of the origins of Swamp Thing, and that it would happen in a largely isolated fashion from the rest of the DCU, but it would still feed into the story. Things get clearer as they go down the line, but transitioning from one universe is turning out to be a difficult task. As James Gunn and Peter Safran struggle to sort out the future of DC Studios, they battle a constant stream of confusing misinformation and volatile fan opinions. It will still be a while before we see the fruit of their efforts, but if you're looking for DC news in the meantime, just be careful which pictures of Lex Luthor you click on.